And we'll just get started. I'm sure that people are going to trickle in, which will be maybe unfortunate for us introducing everybody up front, but hopefully as people are coming back from lunch, they'll be able to kind of jump in on the panel. So just to kind of set the stage for what we're going to have for the rest of this session, we're about to see a really awesome panel with a group of people who are working across this space of visualization, human factors, and cybersecurity. It was an important choice for us to have a remote panel so that we weren't only limited to the individuals who are going to fly to Oklahoma and sit up here on stage with us. And this gave us a way to have access to like a more diverse group of professionals in this space. Sanchari is going to moderate, and she'll introduce herself in a second. And I'll just quickly say, after the panel, we'll give an update about the poster track and kind of an overview, just as a reminder for folks to go and check out those posters. And then Chris will have the closing, and then we'll be wrapped up for today. So with that, could we switch over to the Zoom, and I'll hand it over to Sanchari. Oh, let me add one more thing, sorry. If you have questions for the panel, please add them to Slido, and if you're in the room, feel free to come up to the mic at periods where we're gonna do questions from this audience. You can go up to that one, or we'll make it work when we get to that point. But we do want it to be really interactive. We don't just wanna have everybody talk at us. So, all right, I'll hand it over to you, Sanchari, sorry.
Yeah, of course. So thank you so much, Steve, for introducing, and let me first share the screen. Okay, are the slides visible? Steve, are the slides visible to everyone?
Yes, we can see everything.
Great, thank you. Yes, sorry, I am only seeing like very small snippets of everyone, so I cannot see any, but yes, I got that. Okay, so welcome everyone to our virtual panel on translating real needs for cyber operations into impactful R&D, research and development. Our esteemed group of panelists include Drs. Cami Venier, Dr. Prashant Rajivan, Dr. Josiah Dijkstra, Dr. Glenn Fink, and Dr. Vincent Mancuso. And I am Dr. Shanshai Dash, and I am co-moderating with Dr. Stephen Gomes. So very excited for this panel because we started discussing about that how cybersecurity comes into the picture, and we all agree that cybersecurity must become a shared responsibility, and all the actors should facilitate a secure and responsible digital world. With this vision in mind, we reached out to esteemed members from industry, academia, government, and they all agreed to participate in this panel. So I'm very excited to introduce our panelists in this session. So first we have Dr. Cami Venier, who is a lecturer in cybersecurity and privacy in the School of Informatics at the University of Edinburgh. And her work is in the area of human factors of security and privacy, with an emphasis on technical support groups such as system administrators, developers, and frontline help staff. She leads the Technology Usability Lab in Privacy and Security, TULIPS, with current projects including managing phishing, barriers to software update installation, making safe online choices, privacy in the age of smart speakers, and helping software developers more easily, making sure that user makes secure choices. Actually, Cami was at Indiana University, and I could not meet with her in person because I joined later on, but I have read so much of her work and very excited to have her on board in this panel. So Cami, over to you.
Thank you very much. I mean, as you saw from that list, we just do a whole pile of things in this lab. I mean, some of the pictures of my students working on everything here from how an Android manages permissions versus how people think about permissions, to things like IoT, or the firewall game in the corner is done by one of my undergraduates. Given the topic here, though, I may speak a little bit about our work on phishing at the moment, which hasn't quite gotten out yet, but I think is very exciting and highlights of this space of kind of people and technology working together, but also really emphasizing things like help desk staff. So we started a project where we essentially I sent my computer science student to go sit in the help desk for like 2 or 3 weeks, and she seemed to put up with this. And then we traced what happens when someone reports a phishing email. So I don't know if you've ever tried reporting a phishing email, but if you do, it's usually a very unsatisfactory experience. You send something in, and sometimes it's like a black hole. Nothing comes back out. And sometimes it's like a tone deaf response in which someone sends you something back that looks like a list that they send to everyone and no one bothered to read your email. But what's really interesting about phishing reporting is it's probably one of the most impactful things you can do. I mean, we can train people all the time, like spot phishing, don't click on these weird links, don't give away your data. But all it takes is one person in the morning who hasn't had their coffee to give away something that takes down an entire organization. And it's so easy to fall into that trap and think, we need to go and get everyone to spot this and forget the other end, which is that also all it takes is one person reporting it to go in and add it to the blacklist for the firewall, to go and pull it out of everyone's inboxes, to add it to the filtration system so that no one sees it. So instead of running around trying to get every user to fall into line, we started a project in which we tried to instead encourage users to report, not just by putting up big signs saying, reporting is great, but actually try to think about what would make it helpful to a person to report, what would make you feel good that you reported, and actually get something back out of it. And so we're currently working on a project where you send in a phishing message, and it actually tries to go and send you back some useful advice. So it might look at it and go, I've noticed a lot of financial words in this. If you think this is if you think this is from your bank, this is not from your bank. Your bank never sends from a Gmail address. And that's actually kind of helpful to someone. It gives you some useful information. It tells you something that you can do, like you can look at the address yourself and go, yeah, you're right, it's a Gmail address. And that allows someone to self-do it. And we're also looking at whether or not you can maybe be able to tell someone how many other people they protected. So thank you. An email like this was sent to at least 300 other people. Reporting was very helpful. So that's just kind of one in-depth example of kind of how we work with more with groups like the IT help support while still helping things for users. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Camille. And we will discuss more about the IT help support and how different actors comes into the picture towards the end of the panel as well. So next we have Dr. Prashant Rajivan, who is an assistant professor of industrial and systems engineering and adjunct assistant professor of human-centered design and engineering at the University of Washington. His research agenda is on the intersection of human factor simulation, modeling, and computer security. He is the author of several peer-reviewed publications and book chapters. His work on multi-agent models of teamwork in cyber defense was awarded the best student paper at HFES annual conference in 2014. His dissertation work was a finalist in the Human Factors Prize on Cybersecurity in 2017. His research is funded by NSF Career, HRQ, Starbucks, as well as Cisco. Prashant is also a collaborator of mine, so very excited to have him in this panel. So over to you, Prashant.
Great. Thank you. So thanks for the introduction, and I'm really happy to be on this panel. I know some of you from past work, and I know some of you from Human Factors as well. So I'll just give you a rundown of what my work is. I've been working sort of on different aspects of cybersecurity, like what Cami was saying. I started sort of my journey with the cyber defense world, and that's so the work I'm going to talk today is from that time. So I started working into looking into the team aspects in cyber operations. Trying to simulate teamwork within a laboratory environment so we can study them in a controlled environment. So we looked into how does team processes and team communication or errors in team processes could impact detection and incident response performance. I've also looked into developing agent-based models or agent-based simulations to study these problems. Since then, I've sort of crossed paths with Sanchari as well. So I was a postdoc with Gene Camp for a year and a half. So there, I started looking into the usable security aspects of security or the things. So I looked into privacy notices, Android permissions. We've looked into expertise, developing a scale for or assessing human expertise in security. Since then, I've kind of moved on, and I've started looking into phishing, and trying to develop cognitive models that can explain how people or what causes people to respond to phishing attacks. So what are the memory processes that are responsible for our falling victims into phishing attacks? So I've sort of looked into the different parts of cyber defense or cybersecurity space, and sort of the underneath all of this is like what Sanchari was saying. So looking into the human factors, so studying decision making, looking into judgments, looking into attention, and being able to model and study them at a more fundamental level. So that's kind of my overall sort of journey. So for today's talk, since it was at VizSec, I thought I'll talk a little bit from my dissertation actually, which looked into an interesting aspect in security operations, which is I'm calling this information pooling bias, which when it comes to incident correlation analysis. Next slide. So just a brief overview. So a lot of you working in the space know what a security operations center is. So essentially, most organizations, actually almost all organizations, either have an in-house SOC or someone external doing your security operations. And this is typically managed by a large team of people, and people working at different aspects of operations, from doing triage to monitoring, to incident response, to doing security awareness trainings. So they span a lot of activities, and this can be quite a large team depending upon the scale of your organization. Next slide. So in this space, obviously, teamwork becomes an important aspect, because when you're trying to bring a lot of people together and trying to sort of pool all their knowledge, and then you're trying to defend your networks from threats based on this teamwork, teamwork becomes an important aspect of it. But what happens is a lot of times this team aspects of security operations often gets overlooked. People think, okay, if I bring enough expert individuals into my organization, I'm safe. They should know how to take care of it. But that's typically not the case, because simply bringing a group of people will not be sufficient, and teams can fail for a multitude of reasons. And most of you may have sort of either anecdotal or real evidence that points to that, right? So the idea was, so can we understand what are the issues that team of security operators would face when it comes to incident response and threat detection? So one such factor that came out of discussions was this aspect of, so how does uneven prior knowledge and information distribution impact the process? Because if you think about it, many of these people are coming from different backgrounds, educational backgrounds, experience backgrounds, and they're probably doing different kinds of roles or looking at different parts of the network. So this sort of information distribution can have an impact on how they team together while doing either threat detection or incident correlation, which I'll talk in a second. So the idea was, so how does these information distribution or uneven prior knowledge impact their incident response? Because there was prior evidence about inefficient pooling of information can have an impact on team decisions and team performance. So this is kind of the overall idea. I'm going sort of quick so that we have time for others as well, right? Okay, next slide. So at a high level, what did we do? So we looked into something called as the incident correlation analysis. So what this typically involves is, and this can happen at multiple scales. So this could typically involve trying to find evidences of attacks that happen over a period of time and that happens at different parts of the network. So typically your multi-step advanced persistence kinds of attacks. And evidences for these could be sort of spread across these different hosts in different parts of the network. So incident correlation is this idea of trying to sort of pool all of these information and threats together to understand the full scope of the attack. Now, again, I'll talk about one level, that is incident correlation happens at multiple levels. So we're thinking about incident correlation that happens at a team level, where people of security operations who are responsible for different parts of the network, how do they come together to pool their different knowledge and different information they have about these attacks, and how well are they able to detect these large-scale attacks. So that was kind of the idea. Next slide. And so we developed this sort of elaborate simulation, and where we had participants playing the security operations team. They were 3-person teams, and their task was incident correlation. So they would be given information about their specific subnetworks, so they would know what kinds of incidents occur in subnetworks, and they would come together to discuss what they found in their subnetworks. And their goal was to sort of correlate what were the incidents that were happening at these different networks. And there were 3 main types of attacks. Attacks that everyone saw, that is, everyone knew about these attacks happening. And there were attacks that was just unique to their subnetwork and did not have any implications on the others. And then there were attacks that was part of multi-step, they were connected attacks. So we wanted to understand how this information discussion impact their performance. And we had different conditions. For the sake of time, I'll not talk about that. So I'll stop at the quick results. Next slide. So what we found was that when we got people together, we found that they spent a lot of time talking about and sort of discussing things they already knew were happening in the network. So they didn't really have to discuss that. They didn't really have to make those connections for those incidents that pretty much everyone knew. So almost 3 times or 4 times more of their communication focus was on this, which they already knew about. And they hardly discussed things that they were uniquely available to each other. And this was also sort of shown in their performance, where they tend to detect the attacks that already knew and didn't really have, so the discussion was a waste. So a lot of times they missed these unique incidents. So we had like a sort of a condition where we tried to improve this, but I'll save it for later. So that's kind of the idea. So the idea here is these kinds of scenarios within cybersecurity where there is complex information sharing is needed. So there's a huge scope for visualizations to help human performance and human decision making. All right, so I'll pause at that and I'll move on.
Great. Thank you so much, Prashant. And as we are learning about different incidents and how teamwork in the IT sector comes into the picture, let's now talk about the next panelist, who is Dr. Josiah Dykstra, who is a technical fellow and member of the Senior Executive Service in the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center at the National Security Agency. He holds a PhD in computer science, where his dissertation focused on cloud forensics. He previously served at NSA as a cyber operator and researcher. So Dr. Dykstra is interested in the cybersecurity science, especially when humans intersect with technology and interact with it. In 2017, Dr. Dykstra received the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers from former President Barack Obama. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences and a distinguished member of the Association for Computing Machinery, ECM. He is the author of numerous research papers and 2 books as well. So over to you, Josiah. And just to add, we, Prashant and Josiah, are also collaborating on a very interesting healthcare-related privacy and security project. So very excited to have you here.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. I am here today, as an NSAer. I've been at the National Security Agency for 18 years. I am primarily a computer scientist. I have studied and worked as a practitioner in cybersecurity, and in the last 10 or so years, done more work in human factors. But I learned that much more recently. That wasn't my sort of classical training. I do want to give 3 tips for researchers, but I'm going to talk about a couple of studies that I've done in the meantime. I started at NSA as a cyber operator, and we never defined what we meant by operations here. So my definition is even different than the ones we've heard so far. I did work as what I would call a tactical cyber operator. So something like red team, where there is an element of time pressure and high stakes, which is a different environment than the SOC. NSA has a very large 24/7 SOC in the way that Prashant talked about, but my work was much more tactical. And I did that for about 7 years. And then I did 7 years of research studying the people who did the job that I got burned out of. So the very first project that I did was to study fatigue and frustration and cognitive workload in the cyber professionals who did my previous job. And we learned a lot of really interesting things. We published some papers. We gave a talk at Black Hat in 2018. that got me really interested in human augmentation for cyber operators. How can we help those people do their jobs better? One of the things that I studied for a couple of years was augmented reality. So I wanted to know if something like Google Glass or Microsoft HoloLens would help a cyber operator do their job better. So we built some prototypes, we did some evaluations, and presented some papers about that. I also happen to have a degree in violin performance, computer science and violin. And for the first time ever, I got to combine the two into what's called sonification for cybersecurity. How do we use sound, in this case, music, to communicate something interesting for a cyber operator so they can have the sound going on in the background? So I've got to work on a lot of really fun stuff. The only other thing I'll mention is that I wrote a field note on situational awareness in cybersecurity a couple of years ago with an academic at Arizona State and a practitioner at Netflix. So we wanted to show government, industry, and academia all have a similar problem in cyber situational awareness. One of the key things that we point out in there is there's not a lot of measures to show that situational awareness helps the operator do their job better. And this is something that I'll probably come back to in the panel, which is there's lots of beautiful research, but unless you can show me that it's better, the practitioners will not accept it, right? They don't just want a new shiny penny. So I'll stop by sort of giving 3 highlights that I'm happy to dive into, 3 things that I think make for more impactful research. The first one is practitioners do not want your new tools. They have enough tools already. They would love if you could show a capability in a tool they use. If you develop a prototype, put it into Metasploit, put it into Armitage. If I go and hand my operators a new tool, they will say, I have too many tools. Don't give me more tools. Something I think researchers forget. So that's number 1. Number 2 is to be truthful to your threat model. So much research, right, uses United States college students as the cyber attackers. If your threat model is to protect against US college students, then cool, go for that. But if you're trying to protect against a foreign nation state cyber attacker, that's a really horrible proxy. And so be truthful in your threat models and be true to that. And the third thing is to be as realistic as possible. We often use capture the flag games sort of as a proxy for cyber attack and cyber defense. The goals of a CTF game are not like most of the real world, right? A CTF game, you're incentivized for being fast and loud and capturing points and winning the game. That isn't how cyber attackers work. They are generally trying to be slow and stealthy. Their goals are very different than a game. And so I think researchers need to be very careful to be truthful, at least, about the realistic parts of their research. That's where I'm going to stop for now.
Great. Thank you so much, Joseph. And I also do not know about your violin aspect, so it's interesting to know as well. So next we have Dr. Glenn Fink, who was a 3-year NSF IGERT graduate fellow at Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University, where he completed his PhD in computer science in 2006. Dr. Fink's dissertation, Visual Correlation of Network Traffic and Host Processes, fostered the HONE technology that is currently an open source software project. Dr. Fink was a software engineer for 15 years at the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Dahlgren, Virginia, where he worked on projects such as the Trident Ballistic Missile Program, a unified ground control station for unoccupied aerial vehicles, and a virtual operations network for rapid development coalition warfare. Dr. Fink served for 11 years as an Army Reserve officer in the Signal Corps, where he attained the rank of captain and commanded a communications company. Really excited to have Dr. Fink here, who brings in both the academic as well as the government and the in-operations side to our panel as well. So over to you, Glenn.
Thanks, Shankar. I appreciate it. So since 2006, I've been employed at Pacific Northwest National Lab, where I have a virtual playground of cyber capabilities here. Right across from me is our cybersecurity operations center, and I get to work with a lot of analysts there. I have worked with several visualization folks, Dan Best, who is a part of the steering committee. He's a friend of mine and works with me occasionally. I was privileged to be part of the first VizSec back in 2004, and good friends with Deb Franke and some of the others who were foundational members of that. In the first couple of years, that was my main purpose, was visualization. My whole idea for my career is I want to help the cyber defender perform better. I want to provide performance enhancement for the cyber defender. But as Dr. Dykstra mentioned just a little while ago, it's really important that the tools that we make fit the defenders that we're trying to help. If we don't do that, then we've failed in our mission. So what I'm getting into now is the use of artificial intelligence to solve cybersecurity problems. And I also am hoping that because you all are in visualization, that you can see a new opportunity for visualization using artificial intelligence, visualization, and human capabilities all together. So if you could give the slide there, Shankari. Here's part of the problem. Cybersecurity was the first big data, but it has not been well served by the analytics that we've been able to give. I remember the first cybersecurity analytics that I saw was able to detect a denial of service attack, but it's hard to miss a denial of service attack. You know, that wasn't really a helpful thing, but researchers have not been able to really grasp how big cybersecurity data actually is. I was asked by a sponsor about a year ago, well, why should I pay you to do all this work in cybersecurity analysis and machine learning and stuff like that? Why shouldn't I just take my data and put it into Amazon Q and get the answers there, because they do cyber data? And if you look at Amazon Q's implementation of cyber data, they're talking about temperature and other data from IoT devices. They're not talking about cyber log data. And I would say that if you're going to compare cyber data to a typical thing like financial data, you can see that cyber data is so much bigger in time scale, in data size, in the volume of words, the velocity and the sparsity of the information. We collect a lot of cyber data, and the vast majority of it is useless, and so we can't keep it. But as soon as we throw it away, we find out that we needed that one thing. So we need AI and we need visualization to operate now and in the future at machine speeds. And this is very difficult. So my purpose in talking to you today is to hopefully inspire you to use your efforts to provide what I like to call information prosthetics for cyber defenders. We're not born in an information space. We need prosthetics to operate in information space, but prosthetics must fit the needs of the users. So next slide, please. Here's another problem we have with cyber. We have cyber data everywhere, and it's in silos everywhere. And it doesn't really help for me to come up with a program that solves problems for flow data, but doesn't tell me how that connects to PCAPs, HTTP, or DNS. I need to see the whole overall picture. And Dr. Rajavan mentioned the idea of bringing data together from across the entire, across teams and across networks. And that's very important. And oftentimes, cybersecurity tools don't handle data altogether. It's usually, even though it comes from hundreds of sensors and thousands of formats at multiple rates, it is oftentimes highly redacted and abstracted. So you can't really get to what the real cyber data was, and no single source has all the context. So we need to be able to process all this data together. Next slide, please. And just to give you a little taste of what I have been working on to try to solve some of this problem, the major problem that I've discovered that cyber defenders have is figuring out what their network actually does. I was working for a sponsor whose job it was to go to an industry partner and tell them what was wrong on their network. And what would happen, typically the team would arrive on site with all their equipment and tools, and they would ask, so what does your network look like? Where should we put our taps in? And some guy would say, here's the back of the envelope picture of what it was, and it was always wrong. So what I wanted to do is figure out, is there a way to characterize what normal really is in a cybersecurity enclave? And what I've done is I've used embeddings, which I would encourage you, if you're into visualization, consider looking into word embeddings of cyber logs, because as it turns out, you can plot these things, and they do cluster, and the clusters actually do have analytical meaning, as I'm showing up here. It turns out this is some traffic from an exercise that was done, and the attackers are the suspicious IP addresses. They're very close to broadcast and multicast traffic in this, and it turns out that what they were using beaconed. It was a tool that beaconed out. It was I think they were using. I can't remember which tool it was that they were using, but it was one of the beaconing tools that we're using, and its traffic actually looked a lot like multicast and broadcast. So as it turns out, the attackers were being grouped with things that they acted like, and all the systems the connections that we were seeing grouped according to the kind of thing. So I think this is VizSec, far from being over, has brand new areas and horizons to reach that we haven't even talked about yet. And I think that things like artificial intelligence, machine learning provide not an alternative to visualization, but a welcome companion to visualization, which coupled with human insight can really make a difference in cybersecurity. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Glenn. We really appreciate how you mentioned about how visualization can come as a companion when it comes to cybersecurity operations. So our last panelist is Dr. Vincent Mancuso, who is an assistant at the MIT Lincoln Laboratories Artificial Intelligence Technology Group. Since joining the laboratory, his work has focused on human factors in cyber operations and emerging issues in human-machine teaming. Especially, he focuses on the understanding the intersection of AI with human cognitive and collaborative work to better inform system design and process engineering to improve human performance and decision-making. He is well published in the fields of team psychology, human performance measurement, and cyber-human factors. Prior to joining Lincoln Labs, Dr. Mancuso was a postdoctoral researcher at the U.S. Air Force Research Lab, working in the Human Performance Wing's Applied Neuroscience branch. There he conducted research focused on cyber operator performance, monitoring, and optimization. He holds a PhD degree in information science and technology from the Pennsylvania State University with a focus on human factors and team cognition. He earns a bachelor's in information systems and human-computer interaction at Carnegie Mellon University in 2007. He is also a member of the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, where he currently serves as a program chair for the Cybersecurity Technical Group. So over to you, Vincent.
Sorry, I thought you were just going to put that like on a website. I would have been a little more brief with my comments. So I think one of the things that is a little different than me from probably a lot of people on this panel is, I'm not like, I never really was like intended or interested in cyber. My background and my real pure interests are in kind of team and organizational dynamics. I'm really interested not just at like the inner team level of looking at how kind of humans collaborate and utilize technology to do that, but then when we start looking out more broadly at the organizational and then the multi-team and then the organizational level, right? Because that's just kind of how reality works. And a lot of the work that I've been doing throughout my career has been with the Department of Defense. And, you can kind of see that scaling where, we have an individual cyber team, that's within a command, that's within, some sort of, one of the branches of the military. And so there's a lot of interesting dynamics. And the reason I think I gravitated to cyber more than kind of other more traditional human factors domains, like aviation and whatnot, is really the unique dynamics that emerge because of the lack of a physical domain, right? We have this kind of a physical, logical cyber persona level, where you consider, if we were doing like an air traffic control type thing, and I kind of say, 4,500 feet to the west, right? Our mental models all kind of line up together to understand what I mean by that information, right? But then we kind of go to cyber, where there is like that kind of spatial element, our mental models have significant divergence. And when you look to kind of the industrial and organizational literature, you see that like mental model kind of accuracy and convergence amongst teams is like a major predictor for team performance. And that becomes really challenging in cyber. And, when we have challenges, it becomes inherently more interesting. So kind of in my early part of my career, I spent a lot of time kind of in the lab, studying kind of teams, I guess probably like going back to what Josiah said about, teams of college students doing things. So who knows, but it was still interesting. But more recently at Lincoln Laboratory, I've spent significant amount of time in the field studying cyber analyst operators. We're not going to debate about their term, what they actually do, but more from the defensive side than I think what Josiah was speaking of. I've spent hundreds of hours interviewing cyber operators from around the country and world. I sat on operational floors, observing cyber operators doing things, and it's been really interesting to kind of go from that laboratory perspective where you kind of see things and it's kind of interesting, and then seeing it in the real world. So kind of building on themes, going back to the comment about like they don't need operators don't need a new tool. One of the projects I worked on maybe like 3 or 4 years ago was exactly that problem where somebody in acquisitions bought a bunch of really new cool tools and was going to give it to all these cyber operators to make their lives great, right? And the if you build it, if you buy it, they will come type thing. We quickly saw that was a losing formula, right? But there's things where these things are being purchased, they're replacing old tools. And so the thing that we were interested in mostly was, a lot of times the reason technology fails is because it violates expectations of our processes. And so we went around to various commands and kind of spent times trying to understand not only their individual and team processes, but then take a step back and look at how that impacted the organizational process, right? Which was really interesting because you'd be interviewing, person A, and they would kind of have this process like I do something, then it goes somewhere else, and then it comes back to me, right? And then you interview somebody else, and you kind of know where that went. And we were able to actually map out entire organizational processes and start thinking about where does this technology fit when we are deploying it, right? We aren't trying to give them something new and say, hey, you need to change your process. We are giving you something, and we want to modify that and kind of change that through the acquisition process so it fits within your existing processes and maybe gives you some sort of advantage on top of that, right? Another kind of interesting project I worked on that I think is worth mentioning to this crowd was we had a project where we were working with kind of senior leaders at various organizations, and they kind of came to us and said, hey, we want displays to improve our cyber situation awareness, right? This is like kind of this hot button term. And my response to them was, okay, like cyber situation awareness, whatever you want to call it, is not like a catch-all. It's not a proper, it's not like a proper noun where it means the same thing. So I said, okay, well, what information's interesting or important to you? And we didn't really get far with that. So I built this, and I can find this paper if people are interested in it. We built this exercise using kind of a classic method in organizational psychology called a card sort, where we basically read through doctrine, read through a lot of mission reports, all these types of things, to understand what was all the information that these people were receiving, right? And then we put them on cards and had them prioritize it and then sort it into discrete piles, right? So we could start seeing, okay, what are the high value things? And then what are the ways that their mental models are organizing these information, right? Because you can imagine if you're building a visualization to support their situation awareness, you want to make sure that the really high value things are prioritized on the display. And you want to make sure that you display things in a way that works within their mental models, right? And, we had some expectation that there would be some convergence across, and we did find that. Some of the interesting things we found were, there was a few times where somebody would pick up a card and say, you know what, I get briefed on this information every day, and I don't give a shit about it. And they threw it aside, right? And it was true, right? They were wasting their time by giving them, 2 to 5 PowerPoint slides on some sort of information that really just didn't matter. One of the interesting things that we found was, we had this expectation in the prioritization that you would find this pyramid where there would be a very small amount of important information and a ton of things that weren't important. And we found kind of the complete opposite, where there was like a very large amount of information, or relatively large to the set, like maybe like, between the 40 and 50 percentiles of information that these people found important, right? And kind of at the bottom and then in the middle, there were these things that was like kind of dependent on the day. And at the bottom, there was a very small amount of things, that they were surprising that they were unimportant, but they were unimportant. And then, we also, like I said, we did some kind of trying to understand like how people rationalized about things. And we found this like dual, like kind of like 2-level or 3-level hierarchy where there was everything kind of organized into these interacting groups of local and global, right? What's going on in my organization today and what's going on in the world, right? Because the idea is that the problems that are happening in the world could be my organization's problem tomorrow. And then kind of within each one of those groups, there were like these 3 categories of kind of mission information, kind of, I guess I should have prefaced this. A lot of the research a lot of the research I've done is in the Department of Defense, right? So there is like this element of mission that might not exist in like the commercial sector, for example, this kind of health and posture type information, and then threats, right? So I want to know what are my current missions and how I'm doing towards them, right? I want to know my overall kind of posture, right? Am I at risk in any way? And then I want to know the threat landscape, right? So being able to kind of break all these things down, we were able to then take this information and kind of feed that to the capability developers so they know, okay, here's these, I want to build this, I want to build this type of visualization. Here's the types of display. And I guess to close out, I do actually want to build on Dr. Dijkstra's tenets of doing cyber research a bit. One of the things that I always foot stomp is people always ask me from my experience kind of working with cyber operators, like, oh, how do you get them to talk to you? And the thing I always tell them, there's the joke part of it and the real part of it. The joke part about it, I always say, is the cyber operators don't give a crap about your research paper, right? And that's the truth, right? It's like they see, it is, and the point there is it isn't a one-way transaction, right? These are people, especially that are doing a very important job and have very limited time and get burned out, as we kind of talked about earlier. And you need to be able to push that value back to them, right? And your research paper might not be value to them, right? So kind of thinking back of, and I think a lot of this comes into like participatory design, where it's like, okay, I'm learning about them and we're building tools, but I'm keeping going back to them, and I'm making sure that they know that what I'm doing is to benefit them. Or like in the organizational process thing, being able to lay out their complete organizational process, and where a lot of those things were black boxes outside of their own individual team, really helped increase their awareness of what was happening to their information when it left them. That's about it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Vincent. And thank you so much, all of our esteemed panelists. We have a few questions, but I also wanted to check with Stephen there. Are there any questions, or we can start with the questions which we have?
Yeah, so we have a number of questions. What I don't know is whether they're coming from online or from within the room. So maybe what I'll do is ask if anybody who posed a question from within the room who wants to come up to the mic, please do so. Otherwise, maybe I'll read one from online or one of the other anonymous ones. So, okay, I'm not seeing anybody rising, so I'm gonna ask one. So we have a couple that are targeted at some of the individual panelists, so maybe this will be a quick fire. So for Prashanth, in your opinion, which one would be better to combat cyber incidents, an in-house SOC or a managed third-party SOC?
Oh, wow. So I think probably Josiah and others could also talk to about this. So I think an in-house SOC is for sure. I think if you have the resource and the capacity to do it, I believe an in-house SOC would be a better choice, because with the managed security service providers, they are doing multiple organizations, and obviously they won't be able to pay all the attention, and most of it is probably automated scripts that's doing the monitoring for you. So the short answer is, at least to me, the in-house SOC works better.
Okay. I'm going to read another one, and then I'll maybe throw it back to you, Sanchari. So this maybe is something that I think probably everybody could weigh in on, but especially maybe Kami and Vince. So from a usable security perspective or a team dynamics perspective, do you think that it helps or harms or maybe makes no difference in the outcomes or the behaviors of operators if you kind of bring them into the loop and sort of talk to them about their biases and things that you're noticing as maybe an outside experimenter? Does that actually work in nudging teams or individuals toward different behavior?
Well, I mean, there's a very basic concept here of a lot of times with security, what you're doing is something you don't think about. It's a pretty rare event actually that you sit down and seriously think about what it is you've been doing. And that's true for everybody. And we see this with end users. We see this when we talk to like even in smaller organizations. It's not even something I'm necessarily doing, just by being in the room, sitting down and seriously asking them questions and kind of forcing them to think about it. Of course, it causes a massive amount of self-reflection about what's going on. It causes a massive amount of self-reflection about kind of how they relate to others. And I think that is very helpful for them. We can probably have a lot of discussion about like costs in terms of time trade-off around that, and maybe getting the right people at the right level who are kind of open to that and thinking about that. We did an entire project interviewing privacy champions and developer teams. So these are developers that are actually in the team, but are privacy champions. And they talk a lot about the sheer amount of value just running to someone at the water cooler has and listening to them. And then going, well, have you thought about this keyword? You know, like if you go back to your desk, have you considered maybe solving this by segmenting the data? And so you get actually a shocking amount from that. So I think it's actually quite helpful. But a lot of it is really kind of just more the time than my involvement.
I'll say at the risk of overgeneralizing that a lot of stereotypes are rooted in truth, and a lot of cyber operators are very egotistical. They take less well to suggestion than maybe the average population. But a lot of it depends on the job. In my environment, there's a lot of young, male, single military members who have a particular demographic. But just suggesting things to them or telling them that they're wrong, I've had very poor success with.
So there is some research done on kind of like bias calibration and kind of training people from like a metacognitive standpoint to be aware of their own biases and kind of check themselves and do that type of stuff. And that is very good, because there is things. But the thing that I always like to caution people with biases is, if you kind of look at how our brains work, you know, if you take like a recognition prime decision making example, right? You know, we always kind of like glorify intuition and we fault bias, right? And they're kind of two sides of the same coin, right? We talk about a cyber operator, you know, that sees something and instantaneously knows what it is, and they figure out the problem, and we go, wow, that's great intuition, right? You take the same scenario and they make the wrong decision, and we say, well, they were following their biases and they made the wrong decision, right? And they're kind of the same thing, right? We see something and we kind of attach it to something that we've seen before, and we make these projections based on past information that we either experienced first or secondhand or whatever, right? So the caution there that I like to really highlight is, when we always talk about removing the bias, right, is we also want to be careful that we don't engineer out intuition and the ability for cyber operators from the experts that have that ability. So I do agree that like going up and telling somebody that they're being biased, so they need to kind of think about it, is wrong. And you know, you're not going to get very far with that. You know, I think there are ways that you can train people to be kind of have that metacognition about their decision making that are useful. But I do also want to caution that, like, you know, that second thinking is time, right? And when you think about something that's moving really fast, if it is, you know, a very quick environment, like, you just have to understand that there is a risk there. So
Yeah. So I have one question here. So share. So, and this is to all of our panelists here. So what are some major pain points to organizational collaboration for cyber operations? It can come from all kinds of like industry, academia in general.
So yeah, I have something to say about that too. It sort of harks back to the last question too. Getting researchers and analysts together has always been a pain, because researchers don't want to understand the things that analysts must understand. And analysts live in a very constrained world, oftentimes very time constrained, and researchers live in ivory palaces. And we have something at PNNL that I think really helps to deal with this, but this is a major pain point. We call it ROTR, which stands for loosely research to operations to research. And it involves having small research projects that embed in an analytics group for a period of time. And we get feedback, continuous feedback about what's this doing for me? How is this helping for me? Getting researchers to really understand that the needs of analysts are valid. It kind of reminds me of the IEEE Spectrum cover this last month, which was, do prosthetics really help the disabled people for which they're made? And the answer was, well, not really. They're oftentimes made to do this wonderful robotic grasp, and they can't really use them. And my question to us, the major pain point that I see is, are we making prosthetics, information prosthetics, that cyber analysts can actually use for the jobs that they actually care about, rather than saying, here's a really cool visualization? So I think getting that understanding is a major pain point.
I would say that one big thing is that, collaboration is a time cost, right? It isn't free. And I think to me, like the biggest challenge that I see in the environments that I go in is kind of between team or, interorganizational information sharing, right? Where it's just like the information is not flowing from one place to another. I always kind of describe it as throwing information over the metaphorical wall, where I fill out some report and I throw it over the wall and somebody over there receives it, but I have no idea what happens with it then. I don't know what they need, they don't know what I have, all that stuff. The reason that I see that is because, like I've always said, is that, like I said earlier, is that like sharing information and collaborating costs something, right? And when you are already running really low on time, having that added cost is difficult, right? And the solutions we kind of traditionally saw was, we'll stand up a wiki, right? And like how many wikis have we all had in which people just stopped updating them, right? And so like I've always kind of encouraged, sometimes I always feel like we're kind of like making tools for cyber visualization is a little bit of a red herring. And that's a little extreme of a position, but what if our tools were only at kind of adding grease to the wheels of collaboration, and we didn't just put focus there, so I think like just the challenge of sharing information and the time involved in doing that and building those mental models is very challenging, especially now that people are more virtual.
Sorry. I'm going to hop in here from a different level because I don't work with SOCs. I work with much smaller groups. Anything from like an SME, or we're doing some work with the university. And they're not operating a SOC. They can't afford to. Okay, they always tell us we're impoverished anyway. And so when you look at how they're collaborating, they don't have a SOC coordinating it. Instead, they're doing something we call distributed cognition. It's where you have one problem, and you're trying to get a whole bunch of people to all work on that one, solving the one problem. And even just a basic example of a phishing report, just coming off of what I said initially, you think, I send this report in, one person deals with it. Heck no. You send it in, the help desk deals with it, they escalate it up, and then it happily makes it through a whole bunch of teams. And then you ask yourself, why are 20 teams involved with working with one thing? And the problem is, because each team has a set of knowledge, a set of access. So the people who know how to make the mail server work are not the people that know how to make the firewall work. And so it's hard to really think of this in terms of visualization, but in terms of kind of collaboration, they're living on their ticketing system. Why? Because you have this one ticket and everybody has to take it off. And sometimes what happens is one group finds something the other group has to deal with. So for example, maybe we ticked all of this off and the help desk gets another 6 complaints in. And it's like, well, guys, you didn't block something. And maybe one person goes through it and goes, okay, actually, it looks like we may have missed this IP address. And then that gets fired off to the other team. And so you kind of have this interesting concept of, every time I hear people speaking here, it's all about kind of individuals working. And what was really amazing when we looked at this is it's really one problem that's just being addressed from many aspects. And maybe because I'm looking at smaller groups, it's individuals talking to individuals and less teams talking to teams. But yeah, when we started understanding it a lot better, when we realized this is one problem that is being solved, distributed, but supported by the tools. Even a rudimentary tool like a ticketing system is providing so much support for this group. I think they would probably rebel if we tried to put a visualization on top of it. But at the same time, they're sitting there going, please, dear God, could you put something on this that just looks like telling me which of these emails is slightly different from the other emails that have been reported in the last hour? So they do want information processed, but yeah, don't just throw shiny stuff at them.
Yeah. And talking about the time, I do have time for one last question, and I want all of our panelists to kind of answer that. And it can be your own research as well. So what will be one example of research, past or present, that you think is a good demonstration for impactful R&D for cyber operations? It can, again, as I said, it can be something related to what we discussed in today's panel.
I'll go. I guess I'm just going to pick up something. So when you say impactful, where I'm assuming the impact where you've gone from research into actually deploying something that's actually being useful, right? So that I think I'm taking that as the sense of it. So one research, and I think many of people in the human factors know this person, Anita D'Amico. She was sort of the first few people who've looked into the human factors aspects of cyber defense. She's done quite a lot of work in terms of understanding the cognitive task analysis, or the process by which operators work. And she's taken some of this research and into building vulnerability assessments and code assessment systems that takes a lot of human factor principles and also visualization principles into a product, which I believe is actually being used at many places. So that's one example where someone who's taken human factors research at the intersection of cybersecurity into something that's impactful in the industry.
So I'll throw one out in part because I have another meeting, but it isn't a specific example, but I think the mechanism that Mudge used at DARPA for Cyber Fast Track, which were like $50,000 grants, in cyber sort of generally, they were very fast, they were low cost. That methodology was hugely successful. I really like to see more of that. The attributes of sort of low cost, fast turnaround, like get the bureaucracy out of the way. You don't have to like waste your time with like reporting, like just go do something good for a month. I think that turned into impactful research, not because it required the researchers to sit with practitioners, but I think it sort of forced people to think operationally as opposed to like a 10-year research program.
One thing that I think it doesn't have the impact in terms of, or it hasn't yet, because I think it's so new, but it's impactful in that I think it's caused people to think differently is research by people from Dr. Kimberly Ferguson Walter and Dr. Robert Gutzweiler, in their work thinking about kind of using what we know from 50, 60 years of human factors to build cyber defenses to kind of exploit biases, workload, all these things in attackers, right? So, and I thought they had a paper at Human Factors, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. It did beat me out for best paper, so I always remember this. It was called like, oh look, there's a butterfly, and it was really just talking about how we can, kind of exploit the things that we always are trying to get rid of for ourselves, but exploit them in the bad guys. And while that hasn't yet, and I do think someday it will because it is early, hasn't had that impact in kind of the applied realm. I think it has kind of brought the human dimension into cyber in a very unique and positive way.
I'll answer off of a slightly different group, which is the privacy and security champions, which are not operation centers. Many of them are not actually even security experts. They're just really, really interested. But what was shocked when we did research with them is how many of them do read research papers. They're a unique group. But one of the things they were very frustrated about is while they're willing to spend time digging through this crazy research paper, their colleagues are not. And they were lamenting a lot about how much there's all this research out there, but none of it has been rewritten into a way that's intended specifically for their peers. And so I think there's some really interesting research to be done there in just trying to identify some of the already known best practices and put them out there in a way that can be shown to a peer level person, show, okay, this might be another way to do something, and shown upward. I'll give you another example. I don't know how many of you have this wonderful experience of opening your email and being told that this email is from an external party at the top of your email, thereby destroying all of the wonderful stuff we've invented for years on like the notifications on your phone and everything else. That, as far as I can tell, is happening because Microsoft released a feature and that just makes it easy to do that. And no one else has really ever released anything that says if this is a worse waste of time or anything that can be pointed at. So of course, they just push the button that's easy to push. And again, that's an example where I'm certain there's a ton of research in this space actually looking at that. But it's not been translated into a way that can be shown to a boss or can be shown to a peer. So I think that future impactful research will do that.
Yeah, and I'd have to echo that. I think the silence up front when you asked that question was very telling, because we had to think, oh, what actually has made a big difference? You know, you don't want people say that the graveyard is the place where you can find the greatest potential in the world because it wasn't used. And I think VizSec has a tremendous potential, and we still haven't got there yet. One of the reasons is because practitioners always demand to see the data. They have to make a decision for themselves. VizSec researchers and research in general, we tend to want to insulate them from the data, and that's not going to work for our demographic of people. They have to see the data. And tracking our beautiful visualizations back to exactly where in the packet logs the thing happened is difficult. So I can think of a number of different tools that have had bits of impact here and there, but I'm having a really hard time thinking of a research tool that has really made a broad impact, because right now we're still stuck behind what commerce is bringing us, and it's not the best we could offer, to be honest. And I think we have a long way to go. So I'm glad to be on the team, and I'm hoping to see much more good come out of us.
I know we need to end, but I do want to like say that we also have to remember that cyber, and especially like this human-centered cyber, is a relatively young field, right? Mm-hmm. Like we've been at this for, whatever, like 15, 20 years at most, right? And if you look at like human-centered research in aviation, right, dates back to like the 60s or even earlier. And so I think, not trying to fast forward to the end, and maybe when we have this panel again, the 50-year reunion of this panel, we'll have a completely different answer, but it's something to remember.
Yeah, thank you so much. And sorry, echoing up to what Vincent said, like how about like we all kind of have that vision of having this 50 years reunion panel. I personally, talking about my experience, I have read all of your works, and that has inspired me to be in cybersecurity realm and continue my research. So I think that is also impactful, where we encourage the future cybersecurity professionals to be in the field and learn and actually work towards it. But I would really like to thank all of our esteemed panelists. I know everybody is joining from different time zones, different places, but I'm really glad that we could bring this together. And thank you so much, my co-moderator, Stephen, who is managing the in-person element as well, and all the audience. We really appreciate your time and effort. And I think we can continue this discussion and make sure that actually research makes an impact. And tools, not tools, usage, we actually make an impactful decision there. So thank you.
Yeah, and let's get a round of applause in the room. I think that was awesome. Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I'll just
Thanks,
echo.
Yep.
Enjoy the rest of the conference, everybody.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
All right, could we switch back to the stage mic or PowerPoint? Okay, so we're a little bit over time, but I'm going to make up some time, because if you were here for the keynote, Jordan already sort of introed the poster, and Chris went through some of the poster info as well. So Yeah, I thought that panel was awesome. I wish that could go on for another hour, but we're going to keep to our session timeline. And I just want to give a poster track overview. So at VizSec, we have our paper session, right? We've got full, short, position papers. We also have this poster track where more kind of works in progress, more applied work, especially if you're not coming out of academia and you're working in industry or government, that might be a more accessible format, and we're trying to solicit those kinds of contributions. Normally, this little overview would be done by our poster chair, Fabian Bohm, but he couldn't be here today, so I think he's online, but I'm gonna just kind of buzz through some of his slides. Just as a reminder, we have 4 accepted posters. They go from trying to illuminate information about attack graphs and looking at critical paths there. There's a poster about explainability for safety in reinforcement learning. We have a poster about using cursor behaviors as a way to authenticate users with machine learning and how we can go and trust that machine learning by looking at XAI methods for it. And then we have a poster from Maryland, and I know this poster is physically over in the other room, about Riverside, and they have a sort of dynamic node link diagram about network traffic that's really cool. You should take a look at. Just to echo the thumbnails that Chris put up earlier, this is what you should look out for on the Virtual Viz website with respect to the poster submissions. And see if there are a couple of these over in the poster hall. So at this point, I will announce our Best Poster Award. This is selected every year by looking at the posters that got accepted and then trying to understand what kind of impact they might have, especially if it's a work in progress poster. How could this grow into something that's going to really become a great contribution? And it's also about, who is utilizing that poster format well. We've got our 2-page abstract and then the physical poster. So some notes this year from the jury are that all of the posters they looked at were very interesting, but the degree of maturity on the one that got picked as the best was just a little bit higher than the others. So that was kind of what put it over the top there. And with that, I will announce the best poster went to Critical Path Exploration Dashboard for Alert-Driven Attack Graphs by Aska Nadim, Sonia Leal-Diaz, and Siko Verwer at TU Delft and LaSalle. And let's give them a round of applause. I don't know that I saw this one in person over in the hall. It might be there and maybe I missed it, but you should definitely check it out online. Among other things, they have this really cool visual interface where you can explore attack steps. And to many of us in this room, MITRE's attack framework is something that we have to work with or want to work with a lot. And it breaks down tools, tactics, procedures. And they have a nice way of sort of building in some of that knowledge about how network attacks and other kinds of attacks play out and overlaying that onto their attack graph visualization. So just a few closing remarks about posters. There will be our posters over in Station 2 and 3, which is around the corner. And later today is the synchronous poster session. So I think maybe the Maryland team is here to be able to be in the room answering questions about the poster. And all of these are available asynchronously on the Virtual Viz website. And please engage with the authors on Discord or reach out to them. I think they should all have contact info and everything. And then finally, our last plug for participating in the posters program for next year. So please feel unconstrained by the poster format, right? You've worked on something a few months. It has a lot of promise. Maybe it's not a full paper yet. Maybe it's a case study where you haven't had time to prove it out with some empirical testing. Consider the poster format for that. And it's a good way to get your ideas out there and to be able to share them with a broader community like this. Especially like we said earlier, if it's coming from industry, academia, government, some more unconventional venues. So with that, I'll hand it over to Chris, who I think will close out all of VizSec this year. So we're running a bit late.
Yeah, I got 1 minute.
Okay, so I'll try to go pretty quickly too. So we've come to the closing for this year. So one thing I do want to announce as we close, we have a survey for VizSec. We started this last year, and it was actually quite helpful. Like the panel idea kind of came from feedback from that survey. So this link is gonna this Google form link is gonna be live. The last slide I have will put the QR code back up. So so please take the survey if you have a paper or participated. We'll tweet out a link to it too on the VizSec Twitter. Very helpful for us as kind of a way to assess, what did you like about VizSec? What could be improved? Was there something that you think would be cool to do? More panel, more interactive things like that. Okay, so right, so just a quick review, right? We had a nice keynote with Jordan this morning. Our 5 papers, the panel that we just finished, and posters, right? So we had a pretty nice program this year. And if you think back to, I showed this slide in the opening. We talked about the different topics we have that are available in VizSec, right? Lots of those topics got touched on today. XAI, data protection and privacy, situational awareness, human factors. So, VizSec it really is a big field. There's a lot of breadth in here. Hopefully next year we can fill up some of these ones that didn't get touched on. I want to say thank you again to the organizing committee and everyone on that, as well as the steering committee and the program committee. Really, y'all did all the hard work helping make VizSec happen. So thank you again. And then finally, thanks to the authors, the panelists, y'all for attending, and also the tech support. Thank you for, yeah. We've done 2 years of online Viz, so we all kind of adapted to that. Now you have to do both online and in person, so like y'all are basically doing double the work. So thank you very much. That's not easy. Please keep in touch, right? We have a VizSec website that has a nice interactive proceedings browser that'll be updated pretty soon with this year's papers. We have a Twitter. We're also people on the organizing and the OC, on the OC and the steering committee. Right, so our message to you, we're nice people. If you reach out to us, we will be nice back. So we like to talk, we like to discuss VizSec related things. So feel free to message us on Discord or shoot us an email. You can write, we have an info email address if you want to join our mailing list. If you're interested in participating in the future, maybe joining the program committee or wanting to join the organizing committee at some point, please reach out, talk to us, grab someone on the OC and just tell us. We're happy to, inject some fresh blood into the VizSec program. Okay, so this is my final slide. So I'm gonna leave this up here with our QR code and the survey link. Please have a great rest of the week at Viz. Please try to stay warm. Again, coming from the Phoenix area, I'm not used to this temperature. So have a good week. Stay warm, and hopefully we get to see y'all next year in Australia. Thank you.